I had a long drive ahead, trying to get to this work thing out of town the next morning. But somewhere along the way, the empty road started to feel unsettling. I was alone out there, just me and the dark highway, which stretched on, making me feel more tired than I wanted to admit. I focused on the road, trying to keep going, but with each mile, a strange feeling crept in. I rolled down my window to get some fresh air and wake myself up. It was quiet out there, way too quiet. I didn't see any other cars or even houses, just trees on both sides, their shapes barely visible in my headlights. Now and then, I thought I saw something in the trees, maybe an animal, but I was too focused on keeping my eyes open to worry about it. I just needed a break. Then I noticed a faint glow up ahead, a faded neon sign barely visible in the night. It looked like an old motel, its sign blinking weakly, the words barely clear, Sleepy Pines Motel. It was kind of run down, a few lights on in some of the rooms, but otherwise, the place looked like it hadn't seen much life in years. I didn't really like the look of it, but I figured I could stop just for a few hours to get some rest. I turned off the road and drove onto the gravel lot. It was quiet, dead quiet, and my car seemed loud as it rolled over the rocks. There was this strange smell too, like damp wood, kind of musty. I sat there for a second, looking at the old building in front of me. It was dark, with only a few lights on, and the windows were grimy and gray. For some reason, I felt a chill go down my back. I told myself it was just my nerves, maybe just the exhaustion, and got out of the car. The motel wasn't much to look at, but I was too tired to care. I just wanted to get a few hours of sleep and get back on the road. I pushed open the motel door, and right away, this stale, sour smell hit me, like the place had been sealed up for way too long. The lobby was dimly lit, with a single, buzzing light overhead casting a weird yellow glow on everything. The place felt old, like it had been stuck in time. There were faded chairs along the walls, their fabric worn and stained, and a small coffee table stacked with dusty magazines that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. I walked to the front desk, where an old man bent over a big worn ledger, writing something. He didn't look up when I came in, just kept scratching at the paper with a pen that looked as ancient as he did. His skin was pale and almost see-through, and he was so thin he looked like he could snap in half. The dim light made shadows on his face, giving him a kind of ghostly look. I cleared my throat to get his attention. He looked up slowly, and for a second, I wished he hadn't. His eyes were dark, almost hollow, and they seemed to look right through me, like he knew something I didn't. His face was blank, not even a hint of expression, just this cold, empty look that sent a shiver through me. "Need a room," I said, trying to sound casual, though I could feel my heart beating a little faster. He didn't say anything, just reached under the counter and pulled out a key. It was old, with a thick metal tag attached that had the number 8 scratched into it, barely readable. He held it out to me, his hand shaky and almost skeletal, but he didn't let go right away. When he finally did, he leaned forward slightly and said in a low, raspy voice, "You don't want to stay too long." I tried to laugh it off, thinking he was just an odd old guy trying to scare me. "Just need a few hours of sleep," I replied, stuffing the key into my pocket. But his words stuck with me, clinging like the stale air in the lobby. I turned to head toward the rooms, and as I reached the hallway, I looked back. He was watching me, his empty gaze following me until I was out of sight. The hallway was narrow and dim, with peeling wallpaper and some faded floral pattern that looked like it had seen better days. The air was heavy and stale, and each step on the old carpet felt damp and squishy, like it hadn't dried in a long time. The smell of mold hit me, and I had to take a few breaths through my mouth just to keep from gagging. As I walked down the hall, I felt this weird tension creeping up my spine, like someone was watching me. But every time I glanced back, there was nothing but empty hallway. I reached the door with the faded 8 barely visible on it, feeling a strange chill as I slid the key into the lock. The door creaked open and I stepped inside. The room was tiny and the ceiling was very low, which only gave the sensation of being closed in. A single bed sat pushed up against one wall, covered in an old, faded bedspread with a floral pattern that matched the wallpaper outside. The mattress sagged in the middle, and the sheets looked like they'd been washed 100 times but never quite got clean. Next to the bed was a tiny nightstand with a cheap plastic alarm clock on it, glowing faintly green. I glanced at the time, and my stomach twisted. The clock was stuck at exactly 3:15 a.m., frozen, like it had been waiting for me to see it. I gave the clock a little shake, but the hands didn't move. They stayed there, pointing to 3:15 like they were locked in place. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just a broken clock, but somehow it felt like it meant something, like it was a warning I didn't quite understand. I tossed my bag onto the floor and sat down on the bed, which creaked under my weight. The springs dug into my back, and the mattress felt thin and lumpy, but I was so exhausted I didn't care. As I lay back, staring up at the ceiling, I noticed dark, faint stains scattered above me. They were in the shape of smudges and smears, almost like handprints reaching toward the edges of the ceiling. I tried to convince myself it was just water damage or old dirt, but it still sent a shiver through me. I closed my eyes, hoping sleep would come quickly. But just as I started to drift off, I heard a sound, a soft, steady tapping coming from the wall beside me. I froze, listening. It was slow, rhythmic, like someone tapping a single finger against the wall, right next to where my head was resting. I held my breath, waiting for it to stop, but it didn't. It kept going, tapping away, each tap sounding louder and closer than the one before. I lay there, heart racing, the tapping echoing in the silence of the room. At first, it was just an annoying sound, something I could ignore. But as the seconds ticked by, it grew louder and more frantic, like someone, or something, was getting impatient. Each tap felt like a hammer pounding in my head, sharp and jarring. I propped myself up on my elbows, staring at the wall, trying to hear the tapping. The shadows in the room twisted and danced in the faint green light from the clock, and I felt an unsettling chill crawl up my spine. I wanted to tell myself it was nothing, that I was just imagining it. But the longer I listened, the more convinced I became that there was something, or someone, on the other side of that wall, trying to get my attention. Then the tapping stopped suddenly, replaced by a whisper. It was faint at first, barely audible, but it grew louder, filling the room with a strange murmur. The sound seemed to seep from the walls, like the room itself was alive, breathing in and out, and I was caught in the middle. I strained to hear what the whispers were saying, but the words were garbled, overlapping in a cacophony of voices that sent chills down my spine. They sounded desperate, like they were pleading for help or trying to warn me. I felt my skin prickle as the whispers washed over me, crawling along my arms. It was like icy fingers were trailing down my back, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, not just by the shadows, but by whatever was trapped on the other side of that wall. The voices grew more insistent, louder, filling the air with a sense of urgency that made my heart race even faster. I sat up fully now, feeling the bed creak beneath me, and I glanced around the room, searching for the source of the noise. The walls felt like they were closing in, and I couldn't tell if it was the shadows playing tricks on my mind or something far more sinister lurking in the corners. The whispers began to morph into recognizable words, but I still couldn't make them out. Panic surged within me. I swung my legs off the bed and stood, ready to confront whatever was out there. But the moment I stood up, the whispers stopped, leaving a heavy silence that pressed down on me. My breath quickened, and I felt the weight of the quiet settle around me, thick and suffocating. I felt a wave of dread wash over me, the hair on my arms standing on end. I wanted to leave, to run out of the room and forget all about this place. But something kept me rooted in place, like the shadows were wrapping around my legs, holding me there. I couldn't take it anymore. The room felt like it was closing in on me, so I bolted from the bed and yanked open the door. I stepped into the hallway, desperate for fresh air, but what I found was nothing like I expected. The hallway was dimmer than before, the flickering lights casting strange shapes on the walls. The wallpaper seemed to ripple as if it was alive, and the shadows twisted into figures that danced in my peripheral vision. I hurried down the corridor, but with every step I took, the air grew thicker, almost like it was pressing against me. It felt wrong, like I was moving through a dream that had turned into a nightmare. I glanced back toward room 8, and for a moment, I swore I saw a shadow dart behind the door. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. I had to keep moving. I turned left, then right, my footsteps echoing on the damp carpet. But no matter where I went, I kept ending up back in front of room 8. It was like the hallway was a maze, twisting and turning in ways that made no sense. I tried to retrace my steps, but each turn only led me deeper into the motel's grip. Panic surged in my chest as the walls seemed to close in around me, and the whispers returned, louder this time, filling my ears with a frantic chorus of desperate voices. "Help us," they pleaded, overlapping, each voice more frantic than the last. I pressed my hands to my ears, trying to block out the noise, but it seeped in, vibrating through my skull. I felt the floor shift beneath me, pulsing like it was alive, and the temperature dropped, making me shiver. I spun around, searching for a way out, but every direction I looked revealed the same dim hallway stretching endlessly. The air felt electric, charged with something I couldn't quite place, and the shadows around me seemed to pulse and shift, as if they were reaching out for me. I took a deep breath and dashed forward, trying to outrun the feeling of dread closing in on me. I sprinted down the corridor, darting through doors that led only to more hallways, more dead ends. My heart raced as the whispers grew louder, drowning out my thoughts. I could feel the panic rising inside me, threatening to spill over as I kept running, trying to find a way out of this nightmare. But each turn felt like it was leading me back to where I started, the walls twisting in on themselves, mocking my efforts. I was trapped in this looping nightmare, just another lost soul wandering the halls of this cursed motel. And as the shadows crept closer, whispering promises of despair, I realized I was not alone. The shadows held secrets, and I was becoming part of their dark story, a tale that had been written long before I ever set foot in this place. Eventually, I stumbled into the lobby, gasping for breath. The old man behind the counter was gone, leaving the space eerily quiet. My eyes scanned the dim room, and that's when I noticed it. A leather-bound notebook lying open on the counter. It seemed out of place, resting there like a forgotten artifact, waiting for someone to discover its secrets. I walked over, curiosity pulling me closer despite the sense of dread curling in my stomach. The notebook's cover was worn, the leather cracked and faded. I flipped it open and was immediately hit by the smell of old paper, a musty odor that reminded me of damp basements and dusty attics. The pages were filled with names, scrawled in jagged handwriting that looked like it had been written in a hurry. As I turned the pages, my heart sank. Each name was written in dark ink, and they went on, stretching back for years, maybe even decades. Some names were barely legible, faded as if the ink had started to bleed out over time. The last name on the page caught my eye. It was barely legible, written in a hurried scrawl that seemed to tremble with fear. I flipped to the last page and my breath caught in my throat. There it was, my name, freshly inked, with today's date beside it. A cold wave of dread washed over me. I felt like I was being suffocated. This motel wasn't just a stop along the way. It was a trap, and I had unknowingly walked right into its snare. The names of others were written there, each one a reminder of the souls that had vanished within these walls, their lives reduced to ink on a page. Panic surged through me as I realized the whispers I had heard weren't just random echoes, they belonged to these people. Each name tied to a story that had been silenced, their voices trapped within the pages of this cursed ledger. It felt like a graveyard of lost souls, their stories forgotten, but their pleas still lingering in the air. I flipped back through the pages, desperate to find a way out of this nightmare. But the more I read, the more I felt a heavy weight pressing down on my chest, like the stories of those who came before me were trying to claw their way back to life. I could almost hear them whispering, begging for someone to remember them, to acknowledge their existence. My fingers trembled as I slammed the notebook shut, overwhelmed by the realization that I was not just a visitor here. I was part of something far more sinister. This place was alive, feeding off the despair of those who had come before me, and now it was hungry for me too. The voices in my head grew louder, desperate, drowning out my thoughts as I backed away from the counter, feeling the walls close in around me once more. Backing away from the cursed notebook, I felt a cold sweat trickle down my back. I needed to escape, but my mind raced with confusion and dread. My heart hammered in my chest as I glanced around the lobby, searching for a way out. That's when something caught my eye at the far end of the room. A door, slightly ajar, with a small rusted plaque that read Room 0. There was something about that door that drew me in, a strange pull that I couldn't resist. I felt as if it was calling my name, urging me to come closer. With each step, the air grew colder, wrapping around me like an unwelcome embrace. I hesitated for a moment, the whispers in my head growing louder, warning me to stay away. But the curiosity was overpowering, and I found myself walking toward the door, unable to fight it. I pushed the door open, and a chilling draft rushed out to greet me. The room beyond was pitch black, the darkness so thick I could almost feel it pressing against my skin. I stepped inside, my breath hitching in my throat, and the door creaked ominously behind me, closing with a soft thud that echoed in the silence. As my eyes adjusted, I noticed a single object in the center of the room, a cracked, dust-covered mirror, tilted at an odd angle. I felt drawn to it, my feet moving forward almost on their own. With each step, the temperature dropped further, and a sense of dread settled heavily in my stomach. I reached the mirror and peered into it. My reflection stared back at me, but something was terribly wrong. My face looked pale and hollow, like I hadn't slept in weeks. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. Behind me, the darkness shifted, and I squinted, trying to see what was lurking there. Suddenly, figures emerged from the shadows, their outlines barely visible in the dim light. They hovered just behind me, their faces twisted in silent screams of agony, their eyes hollow and desperate, as if they were trapped within the mirror itself. I staggered back, my heart racing as their hands reached out toward me, fingers splayed wide, begging for release. The mirror seemed to pulse, and I could hear their whispers clearer now, intertwining with my own thoughts. "Help us," they cried, their voices overlapping in a haunting symphony of despair. I stumbled backward, my mind racing with panic, but the figures pressed closer, their faces growing clearer. They looked like they had been trapped for an eternity, their mouths moving silently as if trying to scream but unable to break through the glass. In a frantic bid for escape, I turned and fled the room, slamming the door behind me. My heart pounded in my chest as I leaned against the door, gasping for breath. The chilling images of those tortured souls burned into my mind, their pleading faces haunting me. I had barely escaped the darkness, but I knew it wasn't finished with me yet. The motel was alive with secrets, and it wanted me to join the ranks of the lost souls trapped within its walls. Desperation clawed at me as I stumbled out of Room 0, the echoes of the trapped souls still ringing in my ears. I had to leave this place. I had to get away from the nightmare that threatened to swallow me whole. With my heart racing, I rushed back down the dim hallway, determined to grab my things from Room 8 and make a break for it. I burst into the room, frantically grabbing my belongings. My hands trembled as I shoved clothes into my bag, my mind racing with thoughts of escape. I just needed to get out of this cursed motel, away from the whispers and the shadows that loomed over me. But as I stepped outside, a cold wave of dread washed over me. My car was gone. I blinked in disbelief, scanning the area around me. In its place stood a line of rusty, forgotten vehicles, each one covered in layers of dust and grime, like they had been abandoned for years. Panic surged through me as I spun around, searching for a way out, but the motel loomed behind me, its neon sign flickering like a heartbeat in the dark. The shadows stretched toward me, and I could feel them closing in, whispering secrets I couldn't understand. I took off running down the gravel road, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I had to get away. But the further I ran, the more I felt the air thicken around me, wrapping around me like a vice. "No! No!" I shouted, my voice cracking as I sprinted forward. But no matter how fast I ran, I always found myself back in front of the motel, as if it had a magnetic pull, dragging me back to its clutches. The fear grew deeper with each step, tightening around my chest like a noose. The old man's voice echoed in my mind, chilling me to the bone. "They don't leave." I stumbled to a stop, my heart pounding wildly as I turned back to face the motel. The windows seemed to shimmer with ghostly faces, pale eyes watching me, their mouths moving in silent screams. I could see them now, the lost souls I had glimpsed in the mirror, their faces twisted with despair. I was trapped, ensnared in a web of darkness, just another name in the ledger of the forgotten. My legs felt heavy as I backed away, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The motel was a living entity, feeding off my fear, and I realized I wasn't just an unwitting visitor. I had become part of its story, woven into the fabric of its curse. In that moment, I understood that the whispers weren't just taunts, they were warnings. This place wanted me, needed me, and no matter how hard I fought, I was never truly going to escape. My heart sank as I felt the weight of despair settle over me like a shroud. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The motel's grip was tightening, and I knew that soon I would join the ranks of those lost souls, trapped in an endless cycle of fear and hopelessness. Now, every night at 3:15 a.m., I wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing and my breath coming in quick bursts. The tapping starts softly at first, a gentle rhythm against the wall, but it always grows louder, more insistent. I sit up in bed, my eyes darting around the room, knowing what awaits me. The whispers come next, filling the air with a chorus of desperate voices that seem to wrap around me like a fog. I can't escape the feeling that the motel is still watching me, waiting for my next move. The darkness presses against my skin, suffocating and familiar. It feels as though the shadows have taken root in my mind, planting seeds of fear that bloom with each passing night. I tell myself it's just a dream, that I can wake up and everything will be fine. But deep down, I know the truth. I am trapped. The moment I entered room 8, I signed away my freedom. The old man's words echo in my mind, haunting me with their chilling finality. They don't leave. I try to shake off the dread, to convince myself I'm safe, but every night is a battle. I find myself standing in front of the mirror again, staring into the dark abyss of my reflection. My face looks gaunt and worn, and behind me, those same figures hover in the shadows, their hollow eyes pleading for release. I can hear their whispers, begging for someone to remember them, to acknowledge their pain. I know I'm not alone in this hell. There are others, so many others, lost in this cycle of torment, their names etched into that cursed notebook. I can feel them reaching out to me, drawing me deeper into their despair. It's like I've become part of their story, forever tied to this place that thrives on fear and hopelessness. Every time I think I might break free, I find myself back at the motel, its neon sign flickering like a heartbeat, drawing me in once more. The endless cycle has consumed me, and no matter how hard I fight, I can't escape its grip. The tapping and the whispers grow louder each night, a relentless reminder that I am bound to this cursed place. And so I lie awake, knowing that someday soon I will close my eyes and drift off to sleep. When I wake again, it will be back in room 8, surrounded by the whispers of the lost, welcome back into the darkness I thought I had escaped. The motel will always be waiting for me, a relentless entity with an insatiable hunger for souls. I am just another lost soul now, forever trapped in an endless loop at 3:15 a.m., the darkness swallowing me whole. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more chilling tales.